Hi everyone, Senator Jason Rarick here at the Capitol, and today I want to talk to you a little bit about what we had in our Education Finance Committee this morning. And that was, we had the review of the governor's proposal for what he wants to do in the realm of K-12 education spending. And we've all been hearing this, we've got a very, very small surplus for this next biennium that we're planning for. But the next 2 years out, we have a $6 billion deficit. And we all know our two biggest areas of spending are in K-12 education and in HHS. So the biggest cuts are going to have to come from those areas. Because we've mentioned this before, Minnesota, we do not have a revenue problem. We bring in plenty of revenue. We have a spending problem. And the issue is, with a $19 billion surplus, we did not spend it in a way that was helping generate new revenue for the state. That's why we see this $6 billion deficit looming. And for many of us, we remember a $2.2 billion increase in education funding in the last biennium, but yet nearly every school district around the state was coming back saying, you put us in the red. You had too many strings attached. We can't use the money where we need it most. And when we look at what the governor is proposing in his new budget plan looking forward, he has not addressed one of the concerns that has come to us from school districts and from families. In fact, he's gone the exact opposite way. One of the biggest issues I struggle with when I look at the governor's proposal, he is saying we can save money by cutting the aid that we give to students who go to non-public schools. Throughout many of our small towns, we have, private Christian schools. In the metro area, we have Jewish schools, Muslim schools, and many non-secular private schools. And the reality is, the state spends less per pupil who is in a non-public school versus a public school. And what we've heard loud and clear from these private schools is they don't serve just rich families. Through scholarships and other programs, they serve a lot of low-income students who are in need of the special services and the special attention that they get at these private schools. But by cutting back on the transportation aid, on the textbook and computers programs and such that they can get, and the nursing and the counselor aid, there are many families who will not be able to afford to send their kids to these non-public schools. So the question you have to ask yourself, knowing we spend more on a student in a public school than we do in a non-public school, if cutting the aid that we give to them in the non-public schools forces more and more students into the public school, the state's not saving money, it's costing us money. So what is the governor's true motivation for doing this? Seems pretty obvious. The other thing that I noted and challenged the agency with this morning, they're proposing cuts to non-public school student aid. They're proposing cuts to charter schools. They're proposing cuts to special education. They're proposing cuts to school districts across the state. I asked them, well, what are the cuts that the agency is looking at making? They're looking at cutting one FTE. That's one employee that the state agency is looking at cutting. Folks, they received a 40% increase in funding in the last biennium. And yet, everyone else is being asked to tighten their belts, but the department really isn't. This is such an unbalanced approach to looking at how we're going to fund our education going into the future. This isn't even realistic. It was pretty appropriate that they used April Fool's Day as the day to present this budget to the Senate, because it is pretty much a joke. It's not realistic. It is not how we serve Minnesotans. I sure hope that Chair Kunish and I can work together so that the Senate brings forward a much, much better plan to propose for how we're going to fund education moving forward. It's going to require relieving schools of mandates so that they have flexibility with dollars. It's going to require taking some tough looks at where do we have the most bang for our buck. How is the agency itself going to make cuts? These are the things we have to talk about. This is where the proposed cuts need to come from, not from these services that most directly impact students, but not just students, many times the most vulnerable and high need students. Folks, the governor's plan is completely out of touch with reality. Let's hope between the House and the Senate we can come up with a real plan.